When Donald Trump instructed Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett to sit down, girl, live during a hearing, it was as if the whole room ground to a halt. But what followed left all of the room's occupants, Trump included, silenced. Crockett fired back so pointedly and graciously that even his most stalwart defenders were left speechless. The camera was rolling, and the air in the room could be sliced with a knife. It was business as usual at the House Oversight Committee hearing, one that had already lasted more than 5 hours. Reporters slouched over their phones, aides murmured in the background, and the room was filled with silent expectation. Everyone could feel that a turning point was near, and they were correct. Donald Trump, seated at the center table, was as unruffled as usual. Wearing his trademark navy suit and red tie, he was leafing through papers, making it seem like he did not care for the interrogatory questions he was about to receive. Representative Jasmine Crockett, on the opposite side of the room, was a serene but assertive individual wearing a cobalt blazer and black glasses. As she adjusted her microphone and started speaking, there was a certain gravitas to what she said. "Mr. Trump," she started, shuffling through her documents, "can you explain why in your 2019 and 2020 filings there were such huge gaps in the valuation of your foreign assets?" Trump glanced up, leaned back in his chair, and smirked. He was ready for a moment like this, but what he didn't expect was how Crockett would respond. "I've been more transparent than anyone here," he replied dismissively, brushing her question aside. "And frankly, your tone is disrespectful." Crockett did not bat an eyelash. She replied calmly, "Respect isn't a tone, Mr. Trump. It's earned." Her words landed with the impact of a punch, and whispers reverberated throughout the room. Even C-SPAN's live chat stream began to tick faster. Trump, visibly annoyed, waved his hand in dismissal, like brushing away a fly. Then, with the kind of condescension that came so naturally to him, he stared straight at her and said, "Sit down, girl." The room did not gasp. It stopped dead. The chairman lowered his gavel, hesitating between calling for order or merely processing what had just transpired. Some of the aides paused mid-sentence, and a handful of Republican representatives exchanged uncomfortable glances, but nobody spoke. Crockett, unfazed, allowed the moment to hang. She blinked twice, composed herself, and leaned forward. "Let me tell you something, Mr. Trump," she started, her tone smooth, measured. "You have perhaps addressed many women like that throughout your life, but I'm not here to attend to you. I'm here to attend to the truth. So, if my questions embarrass you, perhaps that tells us more about your responses than my delivery." The room fell silent. It was palpable, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. Then a single staffer behind her whispered, "Damn." Crockett continued, unfazed, "And one more thing, your inability to address facts without resorting to dismissive language isn't strength, it's avoidance. And you're not avoiding me today." For a moment, Trump was speechless. He drummed a pen on the table, thinking up a response that never materialized. The chairman, finally breaking the silence, prodded him to answer the question. But it was too late. The moment had robbed the show. The hearing was no longer a matter of tax returns or foreign accounts. It had devolved into something much larger, a battle of power, respect, and who gets to use it without repercussions. While the media booth erupted, CNN and MSNBC producers raced to release the clip. Clip that one day instructed, that's going everywhere. In 15 minutes, the exchange blew up online. "Sit down, girl" was trending worldwide within the hour, not for the reason Trump might have hoped. Somewhere in Fort Worth, an old lady stopped her ironing to watch the clip again, her head shaking in disbelief. "Lord have mercy," she muttered. "That girl just told him." But Crockett's words were more than a retort. They were the distillation of a lifetime of lessons, of knowing when to speak and when to let truth speak for itself. The exchange in that hearing room had nothing to do with shock. It had to do with recognition, knowing that something had changed, and nobody quite knew what to do with it. Crockett didn't shout or bang her fist. She didn't storm off or demand the attention. She just went on working, turning the page over calmly as though nothing had transpired. But everyone who witnessed it knew this was a moment of raw power. Representative Monica Rayburn, seated closer, couldn't help her response. She looked at Crockett and whispered, "That's how you do it." Across the aisle, Representative Neil Camden wrote something in his notebook and grumbled to his assistant. She just flipped the room around. As for Trump, his face had changed. The assistant, the smirk had faded, replaced by confusion or perhaps annoyance. His usual bravado was gone. Still, he tried to regain his footing, muttering into the microphone, "I'm just saying there's a way to talk to people," but no one responded. The chairman, now rapping his gavel, brought the room to order. "Let's move along," he said. And with that, Crockett took up where she had left off, confident and poised. She didn't have to allude to the exchange. The moment had done its work. Outside the Capitol, the hum continued to build. News trucks readied their signs, poised to cash in on the viral moment. Within minutes, the story was everywhere, retweeted on Twitter, shared on Facebook, and even on TikTok. The word "sit down, girl" had been transformed into a rallying cry for many who had seen the clip and believed they saw something greater in it. But Crockett wasn't there to pursue headlines. Later that night, when her communications director Clara took her through the increasingly large view count on social media, Crockett merely smiled and said, "They can label it whatever they wish." I call it Tuesday. Behind the moment that went viral, though, was a woman who had always understood how to get her voice heard. Prior to serving as a congresswoman, prior to the media attention, and prior to the viral hashtags, Jasmine Crockett had lived a life dedicated to fighting for what's right. Growing up in St. Louis, Missouri, she learned early that words meant something and that truth couldn't be hidden behind the din. Her journey into politics was informed by years of advocating for the voiceless, from a case she accepted in Texarkana, Texas, to fighting for families in her own district who had no voice in the halls of power. When she ran for Congress, she wasn't only well known, she was respected. And when she stepped into that Capitol hearing, it wasn't ambition. It was ensuring that the truth found a seat at the table. When Trump attempted to brush her off with an insult trying to diminish her, Crockett didn't yell back. She didn't have to. She did what she'd always done. She let the truth be the truth. And that's why, when the video went viral, it caught the attention of so many. It wasn't a moment. It was the culmination of a lifetime of work, endurance, and the understanding that sometimes the truth does not have to yell. It just has to stand up. When the hearing concluded and the camera ceased, the real work commenced. Crockett, unfazed by the commotion on the outside, collected her documents with quiet resolve. Her concentration never wavered on the task at hand. Because for her, it wasn't about the moment of going viral, it was about putting in the work every day. And as she left the room, her posture answered the question. She wasn't seeking to be famous. She was there to ensure the truth came out. She hadn't said anything about the moment yet, nothing to anyone, but everyone around her was talking. Down the corridor, Representative Elaine Brewster leaned against a marble column, whispering into her phone. "Yes, I heard it live." No, she didn't flinch. Yes, he really said that. Down 2 floors, however, in the press room, pandemonium broke out. Scores of reporters crowded for quotes, tweeting every couple of seconds. "Need confirmation. Trump called the woman girl on the record. Has Crockett released any statement yet? Check if she is appearing on MSNBC tonight." The panic was infectious. In one of his private offices just off the floor, Trump was apoplectic. "That woman, she was rude," he lashed out at one of his aides. "I was responding to the goddamn question." The advisor did not react, standing in silence as a group of PR spin doctors argued over what was the optimum response. "Do we spin it as joshing?" someone queried. "No," one of them replied. The tone was wrong. She sounded sharp, serious. "You try to joke it away, you'll be worse off," one aide grumbled. "We should have seen it coming. She has a courtroom mouth." Trump overheard that. What? She doesn't take the bait, the aide answered. She lets you hang yourself. In Crockett's office once again, her chief of staff, Clara was pacing the floor, phone held to her ear. Her phone buzzed every couple of seconds with calls from CNN, MSNBC, BBC, even a French source requested a statement. But Jasmine Crockett was holding her tongue, still in her chair, taking a sip of water. Clara leaned forward. I have to speak to her, she told the phone. No, I don't know if she's going to make a statement. She didn't think so. She glanced over at Crockett, her cool face unbroken. Are you all right? Clara asked softly. Jasmine lifted her eyes briefly. I'm fine. We didn't come here to feed a moment. We came here to ask questions. But even she recognized that this was more than that now. Out by the Capitol, protesters were already starting to mobilize. Some sported signs that read "Respect Black Women," but others had shirts with her quote emblazoned on them in bold block letters. It wasn't long before someone created a t-shirt with her words on Etsy. A reporter attempted to ask her as she left, Congresswoman Crockett, do you feel disrespected? She came to a halt, slowly facing the microphone, and simply stated, I feel focused. A single clip generated a headline for every morning show. On the right, the spin began. Talk radio commentators ran the exchange in a loop, attempting to dispute that Trump's tone had been colloquial. What about her attitude? One host brayed. What about her tone? But the story was sliding. This wasn't about tone anymore, it was about a pattern. Progressive commentators responded in kind. Black women don't get to have bad days, one said. They get told to sit down no matter how qualified, how calm, or how right they are. In the meantime, Crockett's email was inundated. Some of them were positive, some weren't. But there was one. It said, you didn't raise your voice. You didn't back down. You didn't blink. My daughter just asked me what your name was. That means something. Thank you. She read it 3 times, its impact sinking in. Outside her office, the media frenzy was only just beginning. Trump's camp wasn't being quiet for long. By evening, his media juggernaut had hit overdrive. In a glassy office in Arlington, communications planners huddled around a flat screen, replaying the confrontation. She didn't shout, one aide noted. She wasn't emotional. That's going to make things more difficult for us. So we flip it, another strategist suggested. Say he was being casual. Say she misunderstood him. An intern nervously chimed in, but it doesn't really sound casual. Everyone looked at him, and there was a silence in the room. Trump watched from his perch at Mar-a-Lago on private feed and leaned back in his chair. They'll forget in a week, he grumbled. We just need something louder to bump it out of the headlines. The strategy coalesced quickly: distract, discredit, double down. The tweets preceded them. Trump's political allies took to Twitter to share statements of solidarity. What occurred today wasn't offensive. It was political theater, one senator tweeted. Another commentator wrote, this is what occurs when we can't even speak to one another without somebody crying racism. The following morning, Trump had an appearance on a conservative talk show. The host had no compunction asking Trump outright, do you regret what you told Representative Crockett yesterday? Trump laughed off the question. Regret? No. I was just trying to get through a long hearing. She was going on, and I said what I said. People are too sensitive. But do you think the way you said it? The host continued to press. I said nothing wrong, Trump interrupted him, smiling. And you know what? A lot of people happen to agree with me. They just don't want to say it. But the harm wasn't going away. Crockett was still silent beyond that initial comment she made outside the Capitol. Her silence, intentional and unflinching, was making more headlines than any press release ever could. That evening on CBS, political commentator Trevor Langford put it best. This isn't about a phrase. It's about a habit. It's about a man who's been in power for decades and still talks as if power forgives all. Meanwhile, back in Crockett's home state of Texas, Local TV stations were airing segments featuring her. Audience members who'd never heard of her before were now tuned in. Her team worked overtime meanwhile. Every outlet wanted her. The Today Show, CNN, NPR, even the late-night shows. But Crockett was still being choosy. She didn't want a media blitz. She wanted the record of the hearing to speak for itself. "This is about what he said," she explained to her staff. "But it's also about how I replied. That's what counts." Still, the cyber attacks worsened. Fabricated quotes, photoshopped pictures, older video clips from other events that were fabricated and presented as proof of her rude, boisterous, or angry behavior. One attempted to cut together all the times she'd cut off a speaker in past hearings, portraying her as aggressive. It garnered thousands of views among far-right communities, but the media narrative wasn't budging. For each manipulated clip, there were 5 actual ones of Crockett's steady accuracy. One young reporter, Maya Latin, penned an opinion piece that summed up the attitude perfectly. "We don't require men to shrink themselves to be heard. We require women to smile as they're dismissed." Crockett didn't smile. She didn't scream. She corrected. And that correction rang out louder than any yell possibly could. At the same time, Trump's defenders were making more noise, but it really felt like shouting into a crowd that had already looked away. Deep down, even Trump himself knew this was not going away quietly. By day 3, the story was ubiquitous. Morning programs presented it one way, late-night comics another. College instructors picked it apart in political ethics courses. Conservative talk show hosts shouted about identity politics as a weapon. Progressives named it overdue accountability. And in between, something began to occur. People were hearing each other. In Birmingham, Alabama, a high school debate coach named Lorraine Reeves showed the clip to her students, then paused the screen. "Tell me what you saw," she said. One student raised her hand. He didn't expect her to answer like that. Another added, "It's like, he thought he was talking to someone who wouldn't answer at all." The discussion was beginning to go viral. In Des Moines, Iowa, retired librarian Tom Beck wrote a note on Facebook that spread quietly viral. "I'm 76. I've had my fill of hearings, scandals, speeches. But this was not left or right. This was about whether we allow people who have power to continue to speak to others as if they don't belong in the room." His post was shared more than 20,000 times. Farrah Densley in Phoenix posted a video discussing why Crockett's reaction brought her to tears. Her voice breaking, she stated, "My daughter's going to grow up in a world where she can hear that kind of sentence and know exactly what it means, and also know exactly how to respond." Even comedians were drawn into it, though not with humor. Stand-up comedian Will Ortega on The Hamilton Show commented, "She didn't clap back. She didn't pop off. She told the truth, and that's what shook people the most. Truth, delivered calmly, from a black woman they believed they could shout down." By this point, Crockett was an icon, a benchmark. Black women referenced her in Instagram posts. Little girls went side by side on social media, posting her with other trailblazing women politicians. Twitter threads dissected her statements as a case study for American power structures. It wasn't commentary anymore, though. Something had changed. When Spokane, Washington, middle-aged women got together and wrote letters in support of her, over 300 envelopes of appreciation came pouring in for Crockett by week's end. Surveys indicated an unusual boost in public support for her, particularly among 40 to 60-year-old voters across both parties. Even more unexpectedly, almost 40% of so-called independents indicated Crockett's reaction made them want to listen to her opinions on policy. This was no longer a popular topic. This was resonance. Privately, Crockett still maintained a tight-knit group. She did not cry. She did not rant. But she did talk to her dad one evening on the phone. "You sounded like your mama in that hearing," he told her. She laughed. She would have thrown her shoe, but no, she said, he would have made him give it back to her first. It was an uncommon moment of levity in a week that had gotten heavier than anyone had anticipated. Because even while the nation debated, analyzed, defended, and shared, there was one reality that didn't change. Crockett didn't seek this moment. She simply didn't flee from it. But what no one anticipated was that one subdued answer would ignite something much louder. A few days after that, a letter from a person she'd never known, 3 days after the hearing, came in the mail. The national dialogue ceased to be about simply Jasmine Crockett and Donald Trump. It began to broaden, spilling into the furthest reaches of American life that infrequently find themselves on cable television. People began talking, not just tweeting or reposting, but really talking about what it means to be heard when you're not the expected voice in the room, especially when that room holds power. At a university auditorium in Boulder, Colorado, Professor Shelby Gaines stood before a packed room of students, chalk in hand, reenacting Crockett's reaction at the hearing. "This," she wrote on the board, circling the word truth, "is what composure sounds like when placed alongside power." A student raised his hand and said, "Why did it go so viral?" "I mean, he said worse." Professor Gaines nodded seriously. "Because sometimes it's not the words, it's the setting. It's who they're said to and who refuses to shrink when they are." And meanwhile, back in Dallas, Reverend Carl Winston delivered a Sunday sermon off script, pacing the aisles of his little church. His voice was heavy with something unpolished. "They told her to sit down," he said, "but she sat in her truth, and that church is resistance." A few miles from where she stood, at a coffee shop owned by blacks near South Lamar, customers debated over lattes and front pages. "She played it perfect," one woman opined, stirring her tea. "Didn't give them a soundbite, gave them a mirror." But then her friend posed the question, what if she had clapped back stronger? Would that have hit harder? A guy at the counter spun around. "No," he said. "Why did it sting so badly?" Because she knew she didn't have to be loud to be powerful. Not everyone saw it that way, of course. Some attempted to twist the moment to suit their own versions on cable news. Some commentators presented it as an overreaction. One of the guests on a syndicated morning show even posed, "Maybe it's just the way he speaks. Shouldn't we cut him some slack?" That clip went viral too, but with fiery pushbacks, because as the debate boiled over on television, actual stories began emerging. Stories about women, particularly black women, being talked over in meetings, interrupted while speaking, referred to as girl by men who had less experience and more authority. An assistant principal in El Paso shared a video declaring that she'd been told that phrase 5 times in her life. Never by a student, always by a person in a suit. A healthcare executive in Portland wrote an op-ed for a local newspaper called "I Was Told to Calm Down, Girl" in a budget meeting. I was the CFO. These tales gushed like water from a broken dam. Not outrage, but quiet anger accumulated over time, finally having a voice. Along the way, Crockett did not play the celebrity. She turned down interviews on the largest national shows. She did not position herself as victim. Her one public statement came during an interview with a local reporter in Austin. "Do you think he was intentionally disrespecting me?" the reporter asked. Crockett paused, then said, "I think intent is less important than impact. And if someone doesn't understand the weight of their words, maybe they shouldn't be carrying them in public." That line hit just as hard as the one from the hearing. At a roundtable in Detroit, civil rights organizers began organizing Speak It workshops for young women of color. The first poster stated, "You don't have to yell to be powerful. Just be clear." During a school board meeting in Tallahassee, high school junior Jaya read Crockett's quote aloud before arguing her case for a new student-driven ethics committee. The room stood up and applauded. In the background of all this somewhere, political strategists began whispering 2028, not because Crockett had spoken it, but because something had changed, and her name was in the middle of it. Clara, her communications director, joked about it one night while sorting through emails. "You know, people are placing your quote on coffee mugs now?" Crockett didn't even glance up. "I hope they're spelling it correctly." "Don't you feel anything about any of this?" Clara demanded. Crockett shrugged. "I'm moved by the fact that more people are hearing one another, not me." But what neither of them anticipated was the message in her inbox that evening. A letter that wasn't from a politician, journalist, or fan, but from someone who knew precisely how it felt to be told to sit down and opted, instead, to stand. It was almost midnight when Clara spotted it, hidden among dozens of interview requests and press releases. A plain email with the subject line, "Thank you from Tulsa." No signature, no title, no Twitter handle, just a brief message from the person, Clara Bishop. Clara opened it, anticipating another lovely note. What she read made her freeze. "Dear Representative Crockett, I observed what occurred at the hearing. I've seen it 5 times now. I am 68 years old. I've never written to a politician in my entire life. When he told you to sit down, I heard my high school principal in 1973 say to me, 'You're not the kind of girl who gives speeches.' When you stood up and you responded to him without yelling, without stepping back, without like it never occurred, I was 17 again. I felt important. You spoke not only for yourself, you spoke for every woman who has ever been instructed to quiet her voice when her truth is inconvenient. Thank you. With sincere respect, Clara Bishop, Tulsa, Oklahoma." Clara didn't send it immediately. She just sat on it. The next day, she put Crockett's phone into his hands. "Read this," she whispered. Crockett took the phone, read silently, and set it down on the table without speaking. "Would you like me to respond?" Clara inquired. Crockett hesitated. "No, I want to see her." 3 days later, Crockett's office arranged a visit. No cameras, no announcement, just a quiet meeting in a public library in downtown Tulsa. When Clara walked in wearing a simple tan coat and holding a worn notebook, Crockett stood and smiled. "I'm not here as a congresswoman today," she said. "Just Jasmine." Clara smiled back. "I'm not 68 today. I'm 17. They spoke for more than an hour. No reporters, no staff. Clara reminisced about being raised up in the segregated ghettos, about seeing leaders come and go, about being denied promotions by men she'd trained. "I stopped raising my hand," she said. "Decided there wasn't much use." Crockett listened, leaned forward, asked questions. Clara once pulled out a creased newspaper clipping of Shirley Chisholm and said, "When I was a little girl, this was the woman we believed would break it all open." Crockett nodded. "She did. She cracked it. Now we keep widening the gap." When the session was over, they embraced, nothing official, nothing staged. But Clara's granddaughter, who had taken her, had snapped a hasty shot, just the two of them, in front of the front window, laughing. She uploaded it later that day with a straightforward caption, "My grandma met her hero today." They didn't discuss politics. They discussed truth. The picture went viral. By week's end, it had been tweeted by Ava DuVernay, Tracy Ellis Ross, and even Sherilyn Ifill, each placing their own comment regarding legacy, lineage, and unflinching bravery. Clara Bishop, who'd never owned a social media account, was a trending name overnight. When CNN caught wind of the story, the headline was, "The letter that said everything without a microphone." Interview requests poured in to speak with Clara. She turned them all down. She only consented to writing one article for the Tulsa Sentinel, her local paper. It was called "The Day I Felt Heard." There in it, she portrayed Crockett not as a politician, but as a mirror held up to a nation too accustomed to avert its gaze. Meanwhile, Crockett delivered no press statement regarding the visit, no campaign commercial, no photo opportunity. When questioned about it weeks later during an interview, she just stated, "Some moments belong to the people who lived them, not the people who watched." That line was the banner headline on 3 political blogs. The following morning, the entire exchange, a letter, a meeting, a photograph, reminded individuals that change can happen with even the smallest stages. Sometimes it begins with a humble response that lands in the inbox of someone who believed their voice had been silenced. But as that tale was settling into hearts nationwide, another change was occurring, this one within the very institution in which it originally took place. The House of Representatives doesn't act fast, not for outrage, not for media outcry, not even for its own prestige. But this time, something was different. A week later, the ethics committee quietly held an emergency meeting behind closed doors. No cameras, no comment, only 12 members from each side sitting in front of the same screen, viewing the same 47-second video over and over. "Sit down, girl." Pause. Followed by Crockett's response. Silence. Even the cynics who normally rolled their eyes at optics conceded this one could not be dismissed. It wasn't merely bad PR. It was a moment that made the whole chamber complicit. Some of the representatives wished to let it go. Others, particularly those up for re-election, advocated for a statement of condemnation, not of Trump himself, but of disrespectful language aimed at any member, no matter the gender or origin. It wasn't much, but it was a crack. Meanwhile, murmurs of procedural reform began percolating. Talks about establishing firmer boundaries for how witnesses speak to members. One of the proposals called for new required briefings for former presidents who testify, because apparently that's where we are these days. And aside from politics, the change was seen in quieter terms. Crockett was invited to give talks at Stanford School of Government, then Harvard Law, and then an out-of-nowhere invite from a small community college in Jackson, Mississippi. She took all three. She began her remarks at Stanford not with a narrative about the hearing, but with a narrative about her first landlord case when she was a public defender. "These individuals weren't anticipating headlines," she said. "They were waiting for someone to speak clearly, to hear clearly, to create space for truth in rooms that weren't designed for them." She told it at Harvard about tone, the manner in which women of color are informed their voice is too loud, even when they whisper, their questions too confrontational, even when they are reasonable. And she told it at Jackson after breaking entirely from her notes and asking the audience, "What do you do when someone tells you to sit down? Politely, cruelly, or quietly?" A front row student replied, "You stand anyway." Crockett smiled. "Exactly, even if your knees shake." Back in Washington, younger lawmakers started to mirror her language in their own committee hearings. It wasn't imitation, it was something else, permission, a change of stance. Being straightforward no longer felt quite so rough. Being transparent no longer felt quite so dangerous. Crockett herself stayed on track. She filed 2 new bills in the following weeks, one on data transparency in federal contracts, another on public safeguards during emergency detentions. Neither was relevant to the hearing, but both were constructed from the same fundamental belief: truth is best served in sunlight. But behind the scenes, Trump was still seething. He groused at a fundraiser in Pensacola about how the hearing was staged, how the clip had been manipulated. The Crockett had an attitude, he said. One of the donors asked him if he regretted saying it. He laughed and changed the subject. The world kept moving. Crockett's staff kept grinding. They barely had time to catch up on the mail, let alone the dozens of invitations pouring in. But they noticed something: the tone of the messages had shifted. It wasn't just about praise or politics. It was about reflection. One came from a woman in Santa Fe. "I've worked in finance for 20 years. I've been addressed as girl more times than I can remember. I never complained, but after observing you, I went to my boss's office and instructed him to address me using my name. My name alone. That's it." It was a victory. Another was from a boy in Oregon who was a teenager. "I came across your video and shared it with my mom." She sobbed. "I didn't understand why at first, but then she explained to me about how people talked to her at her previous workplace. Now I understand. Thanks." Crockett read all of them. She didn't save the headlines, she saved the letters. But as policies were discussed and anecdotes were swapped, one last question hung quietly in the shadows. What does respect look like when the cameras are turned off and no one is trending any longer? The clip fell from trending topics. Soon, new headlines dominated, new outrage, new distractions. But for many, the moment never truly disappeared. It remained stuck in people's minds, not due to drama, but due to what it said and what it demanded from us. For the next few months, Representative Jasmine Crockett never referred to what occurred as a viral moment. She never referred to it as historic, never went for the fame, never gave the press what they craved, a clean narrative with a clear arc and a large, shiny finish. Because Crockett understood better than anybody else, actual change is not made in headlines. It's made in discussions and back rooms and the behind-scenes choices people make about the way they present. She continued working. She attended hearings. She maintained her questioning sharp. She offered legislation that most individuals will never see, but which will impact actual lives. She spoke to constituents in strip mall storefronts, church basements, and high school auditoriums, fielding questions on housing, healthcare, and transportation, as if none of the viral moments had ever occurred. And that's what earned people's respect for her. Not the clapback, not the fame, but the consistency. She didn't use the moment as a brand. She allowed it to become a point of reference, a demonstration of what it means to stand firm without making your voice a weapon. That's what resonated with folks. A Flagstaff teacher put it best at a parent-teacher forum. My daughter saw that video. She didn't watch a woman be disrespected. She watched a woman respond like she knew who she was. That means something in an age of overreaction. Crockett's equanimity radicalized. Because here's the thing, there are still too many rooms in this nation where respect is not equally distributed. Too many tables where some folks are supposed to remain silent. Too many talks where power demands acquiescence, not truth. But moments like these don't merely reveal the fault lines. They also illuminate us as to who's willing to push back without hesitation. Crockett didn't win a fight that day. She didn't blow anything up or shut anything down. What she did was make us remember what strength really looks like. It's not always loud. It's not always rage. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's being able to let someone show his cards while you stand your ground. And sometimes it's just telling them, you don't talk to me like that. Plain, unadorned, undeniable. So what do we learn from this? Perhaps it is this. When you know who you are, you don't have to prove yourself in the moment. You simply have to be consistent. When people try to make you small, don't meet them at their level. Maintain your own. Because at some point, people will notice. They will remember how you stood, how you didn't budge, how you let them know without being brutal. And that lingers. So whether you're in court, in class, at the office, or sitting in on a live TV hearing, speak with intention. Ask meaningful questions. And when someone attempts to belittle you in one sentence, respond with one that rings out longer, because that's how truth moves. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you of someone in your life, or something you've experienced, or a moment you remained quiet when you should have spoken out, don't let it end here. Pass on the story, begin the conversation, and subscribe for more that goes beyond the headlines. We're not here for the noise. We're here for what matters.